Before diving into this story, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe, because here, every story is a new emotion you won't want to miss. The wind howled through the old estate, sweeping dry leaves across the overgrown garden paths. The gardener knelt down, reaching to pull out a stubborn weed near the ancient fountain. His fingers brushed against something cold and solid buried beneath the soil. Dusting off the dirt, he uncovered an old, rusty chest sealed with the family's crest. He had always tended to the roots of the earth... But that day, he uncovered something that would save the very roots of his family's legacy. Pedro had been the silent guardian of the Montenegro estate for over 2 decades. A man of few words, his weathered hands and keen eyes told stories of a lifetime spent nurturing the land. He had watched the family's children grow beneath the sprawling oaks, overheard whispered arguments behind the rosebush, and witnessed moments of joy and sorrow that no outsider could understand. To Pedro, the mansion was more than just a job. It was a living memory, rooted deep in every stone and petal. His loyalty was unspoken but unwavering. Years ago, a younger Pedro gently showed little Helena how to plant a tiny sapling in the garden's richest soil. Her innocent voice echoed with gratitude as she said, "This house only feels alive because of your flowers, Pedro." That moment captured the unbreakable bond between the gardener and the family he served, a bond that transcended class and silence. The garden was their shared sanctuary, a place where trust grew alongside every blossom and leaf. Now, Helena stood on the edge of losing everything her family had built. After her father's sudden passing, a new lawyer had appeared, casting dark shadows over the estate's future. Claims of mysterious debts threatened to take away the home she loved, and the mansion was on the brink of being seized. Helena, burdened by grief and uncertainty, clung to the hope that somewhere within the grounds that Pedro had tended for so long lay the truth that could save them all. While tending to the jasmine bushes near the old fountain, Pedro's shovel struck something hard beneath the soil. Curious, he carefully dug around the area until he uncovered a hidden compartment concealed by layers of earth and roots. Inside, he found a bundle of faded papers, yellowed by time but still legible. His heart raced as he realized these documents were official property deeds and financial records, proof that the estate had been fully paid off over a decade ago. Yet these vital papers had never been submitted to the county registry. The documents bore the signature of Helena's late father, alongside a clear clause forbidding any sale or foreclosure of the mansion until the year 2040. This discovery shattered the narrative that the family was drowning in debt. Someone was deliberately hiding the truth, and the mansion was at risk because of lies and deceit. Pedro knew this could change everything, but only if the right people listened. With a mix of hope and urgency, Pedro sought out Helena, who was overwhelmed by the weight of grief and the pressure of impending legal battles. When he showed her the papers, her eyes flickered with disbelief and exhaustion. Surrounded by her skeptical uncles and the cunning family lawyer, Helena barely had the space to consider Pedro's claims. To them, Pedro was just a gardener and an uneducated man grasping at straws. The family meetings became battlegrounds where Pedro's voice was drowned out by cold skepticism and dismissive glances. His attempts to warn Helena and her relatives about the forged claims were met with accusations of delusion and interference. The uncles, eager to liquidate the property, branded Pedro a troublemaker. His warnings seemed to fall on deaf ears, deepening the isolation he felt. One evening, during a tense family gathering, Pedro stood up to speak. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice carried the weight of truth. He pleaded for them to look beyond appearances and listen to the facts in his hands. Instead of understanding, he was met with cold dismissal. The lawyer sharply interrupted him and ordered him to leave, ending the meeting abruptly. Pedro's heart sank as he left the room, knowing the fight was far from over. Alone in the sprawling garden, Pedro clutched the documents tightly. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting soft shadows across his weathered face. He whispered to himself, "This garden has been the resting place for my sorrows." But here too, God has planted the seed of truth. The weight of solitude pressed down on him, but so did a newfound determination. Memories of the mansion's past flooded Pedro's mind. The laughter of children, the whispered secrets shared among old walls, and the quiet strength that once held this family together. He believed that somewhere beneath the surface, justice was waiting to bloom, just like the flowers he lovingly cared for. Despite rejection, he resolved to protect the legacy entrusted to him. Pedro reached out to an old friend, a retired clerk from the local registry office, hoping to verify the authenticity of the documents. Together, they pored over the faded ink and official seals, confirming that the property was indeed paid off years ago. The papers were genuine, undeniable proof that the foreclosure was based on fraud. Armed with this validation, Pedro returned to Helena, his spirit renewed but cautious. He knew convincing her and the rest of the family wouldn't be easy. Their trust had been shaken by months of stress and betrayal. But the truth was a powerful thing, and he was determined to help Helena reclaim what was rightfully hers. As the days passed, Pedro's presence in the household became more than that of a gardener. He was a keeper of secrets, a protector of hope. The garden, once just a patch of earth to him, had become a symbol of resilience. And even if the family hesitated to listen, Pedro knew the fight to save the mansion had only just begun. Pedro traveled across town to a modest apartment on the edge of the city, where his old friend, Senior Antunes, lived. Once a respected clerk at the municipal registry, Antunes had a sharp memory and a deep understanding of property law. As they sat together at the small kitchen table, surrounded by old papers and the scent of strong coffee, they examined every page Pedro had found. Antunes carefully inspected the official seals and compared the signatures with archive copies. After a long pause, he looked up with certainty in his eyes. The documents were legitimate. With that validation, Pedro's hands no longer trembled with doubt but with anticipation. The weight of truth now gave him strength. He returned to the mansion before sunrise, the papers wrapped in a cloth and held close to his chest. When he found Helena, she looked pale and worn, but there was still a flicker of the girl who once planted Jasmine by his side. Pedro gently handed her the documents, his eyes steady and voice calm. "Your father meant for this house to stay in your hands." On the morning of the final hearing, the air around the courthouse was thick with tension. Helena stepped into the courtroom with Pedro seated quietly behind her. The lawyer representing the uncles stood tall and confident, ready to sign away the family legacy. But Helena, clutching the freshly verified documents, walked straight to the judge and requested to speak. Silence fell across the room as she presented the new evidence. The judge examined the papers with growing curiosity, flipping through each page and pausing at the seal of the city registry, faded but unmistakably authentic. The lawyer immediately objected, accusing them of forgery and desperation. But the judge raised his hand and calmly requested verification from the court's clerk. After a tense few minutes, the clerk confirmed it. The debt had been cleared long ago. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge's voice echoed through the room as he declared the foreclosure suspended effective immediately. All actions toward the seizure of the Montenegro estate were void. Helena's face crumpled in a mixture of disbelief and relief, her eyes brimming with tears. The liar was visibly shaken, and the uncles could no longer meet Pedro's gaze. What was once nearly lost had now been saved by the quietest voice in the room. Outside the courthouse, Helena turned to Pedro with gratitude that words couldn't express. "You didn't just save the house," she said softly. "You saved our history." Pedro simply smiled, the sunlight catching in the lines of his weathered face. The mansion still stood tall on its hill, but now its roots were stronger than ever deepened, not by brick or stone, but by the truth one man refused to bury. The golden light of late afternoon bathed the Montenegro, a state as birds chirped softly in the trees Pedro had once planted as saplings. The garden seemed to bloom brighter that day, as if celebrating the return of peace. Helena walked slowly through the winding paths, her steps guided by memory and gratitude. She found Pedro near the fountain, trimming the jasmines like he always had. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around him, her tears soaking into the shoulder of his worn shirt. "You're not just the gardener of this house," Helena whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You are the root that held us together." Pedro stood still for a moment, then gently placed his hand over hers. But there was no need for him to speak. His silence had always spoken louder than most voices ever could. He attended not just to plants, but to a family's soul. And now, that family saw him clearly. The mansion, once at the edge of being lost, stood tall and proud on the hill once again. Its windows gleamed, its garden bloomed, and its walls held stories that would never be erased. Helena decided to renovate the library and dedicate a section to her father's legacy and Pedro's. A plaque was mounted in the hallway near the garden entrance, for the hands that protected more than soil. The uncles, now silent and distant, no longer held influence over the estate. The lawyer resigned quietly after the ruling, and whispers of legal consequences followed him. Pedro, however, declined all offers of reward or recognition. He returned to the garden every morning, whistling softly, his fingers buried in earth, planting hope one seed at a time. His joy came not from applause, but from the blooming of life around him. Helena invited local schools to visit the estate gardens, where Pedro taught children about the history of plants and the power of patience. Each time he knelt to plant a new flower, the kids would gather around, eager to learn. Some called him Professor Pedro with wide grins, and he would smile with quiet pride. The garden had become a place of memory, wisdom, and renewal. It was no longer just a symbol of wealth, it was a sanctuary of truth. In the evenings, Helena often sat near the fountain where everything had begun. She would listen to the wind rustling through the leaves, remembering her father's laughter and Pedro's silent devotion. She had almost lost everything, but it was the quiet courage of a man the world overlooked that had saved her. Her eyes would sometimes well with tears, not from sadness, but from knowing she'd never take loyalty for granted again. Sometimes the ones who save us don't wear suits or stand in the spotlight. Sometimes they are the ones whose hands are stained with soil, whose words are few, but whose hearts carry centuries of love. Pedro didn't need recognition, he had purpose. And as long as the garden lived, his story would live too. Because our roots, no matter how hidden, are always our greatest strength. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. Your words might inspire the next story. And hey, if you felt something real today, consider subscribing. We're building a community where stories heal, connect, and change lives. One video at a time.